So I'm Victor Schoenbach, and today is Friday, September the 1st, 2017. I'm here with Dr. Alan Wilcox in his home. He's graciously invited us here to have the interview. And Alan is a graduate of the Department of Epidemiology at UNC Chapel Hill with numerous distinctions. So we'll find out about them in just a moment.
Thank you, Vic.
So thank you. This is really wonderful.
Well, thanks for including me in this auspicious company that you just mentioned.
And I was watching some of your interview this morning, the one that Epidemiology did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So people should know that Alan Wilcox led a program of interviews with leading epidemiologists, which were published in Epidemiology, the journal, and online as recorded interviews. And if you Google me, you can find links to his website. So I wanted to ask the NIH interview, EHS interview began with your coming to the field of epidemiology. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to back up a little bit. Mm-hmm. Where were you born? How did you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm a Midwesterner by upbringing. I was born in Ohio and grew up in suburban Detroit. Pretty unremarkable growing up. I was the first kid in my family to go to college, and so I was really lucky that there was this University of Michigan that was nearby, that was cheap, that gave me a lot of opportunities that I had no anticipation of before I went.
You were a first generation college student?
Yeah, right. And I had a scholarship to Michigan that was terrific, and I was able to basically to pay my own way through school, hardly possible today. And right, and then I finished undergrad without really knowing what I wanted to do, so my closest friend had started medical school, and he said, you can do this, you might like this. And medical school was like just completely off my radar. I didn't know anybody who was a doctor. Yeah. Or except my own physician. What wasn't part of our social circle growing up. I didn't, and the people who were planning to go to medical school, I couldn't imagine, how they made that decision. And then, I thought, well, if I don't know what I want to do, maybe this will give me some opportunities. So I got into Michigan Medical School and found some things I liked, some things I didn't like, and graduated without really knowing what I was going to do. Although, in my fourth year of med school, turned out to be important. I was able to take electives in the School of Public Health.
At Michigan?
At Michigan. And so I just dabbled, I did some, I actually did the equivalent of a master's degree, although I didn't get the MPH because at that time they wouldn't give, one degree for two degrees for the same work, right? But I took a little epidemiology. I thought it was really boring. It was the kind of 1920s epidemiology of the psittacosis epidemic in the schoolyard in Milan, Michigan. I was just not interesting to me at all. But I took a demography course, and it turned out that demography was really fascinating to me. Mm-hmm. The notion that you could learn something about population health just by looking at birth rates and death rates and reproduction rates. And so that was really interesting, and I took some courses in population planning. I was interested in obstetrics, and that all was sort of interesting, but I graduated without really knowing what I was going to do. So I did an internship, a rotating internship, and then...
and also at Michigan?
No, I did this in Syracuse, New York.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah. It's kind of a longer story how that happened, but...
what led you to Syracuse?
Well...
another cold climate, so it fits. But...
Yeah, well, it was... So, my wife was also a med student. We were in the same class. And we had our daughter when we were in fourth year of medical school. a planned pregnancy, I should hasten to add. I don't know why we thought that was a good idea, but we just wanted to get started with having kids. So Claire did her internship first, and I stayed home and took care of our baby the year after medical school.
Good for you.
Which horrified some of my medical school professors. They thought I was just giving up my career. Get off the train and you'll never get back on. But
Luckily they were wrong.
well, we knew we both couldn't do, clinical medicine at the same time. It's just, there's nobody to do the laundry.
Yeah.
So, we were in Rochester at that time for her internship, and we were planning on going overseas at that point to do some family planning stuff, and my dad got very sick, so I didn't want to leave the country. So at the last minute, I decided, well, I better do my internship now, and we just took the nearest thing we could grab because of all of our family concerns. So that was in Syracuse, which is just down the road from Rochester. So
and what did your wife do while you were in
she worked in the student health service at Syracuse University, and took care of her baby.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then I decided public health school probably would be an interesting thing to do, and so we decided on North Carolina because our closest friends were also about to make a move and start further training, and my friend was going to do family medicine, and so
who was that?
Kurt Eshelman.
Oh yes, I've heard the name.
Yeah, so he was looking at some residencies that didn't have a school of public health, and I was looking at places like Hopkins that didn't have a good family medicine residency, but Chapel Hill had it all, so we moved to Chapel Hill, and I started in the master's program in maternal and child health.
Mm-hmm. Who was your advisor there?
Naomi Morris,
mm-hmm.
and Arden Miller.
Uh-huh.
Naomi was the chair, and Arden was really my prime. No. Was Arden the chair at that point? He was the president of APHA. I'm kind of confused about...
Well, he was chair for a while.
He was chair for a while, and so they were both advisors. And, as sort of was my pattern, I got all the way through the MPH and still didn't know what I wanted to do. And Naomi, bless her heart, said, after hearing me, kind of vent, she said, I think what you want to do is be an epidemiologist. And I couldn't quite believe that because I hadn't really paid much attention to epidemiology since my not so good experience in medical school.
Now, I want to come back to this exact point, but you mentioned your father, and I didn't get to ask you about your parents. What did your parents do? Who were they? Where were they from?
They both were born in Detroit. Most of my grandparents were immigrants, came to Detroit for the factory jobs.
Immigrants from?
England and Romania.
Hmm.
And my folks both grew up in not very good circumstances, no opportunity for education. But they were both smart, capable people. And my dad he had a blue-collar job, but he ended up being a manager in a big company in Detroit. So he did not have any college education, but my folks were both serious about their continuing education, and they were always taking courses at night school and things like that for as long as I could remember. And they certainly encouraged their kids to get education. They were very supportive of us going to school after high school.
And a side note, what were you doing in Ohio to get born?
That's where my dad went after the war, after he was discharged from the Navy in the war. And he had a sister who lived in Columbus, and so he moved there and started work as a mechanic. And then got promoted and was offered a supervisor position in Detroit, and that's where he moved to.
So when you're coming back to the School of Public Health at UNC, so you were in MCH, you did the MPH, you must have taken Epi 160.
I did.
Epi.
I did.
Was it better than the one at Michigan? Or maybe I shouldn't put it that way. What did you think of it?
So, I had enough demography and epidemiology before to think that I knew all this stuff. And I was kind of, probably not very receptive for whatever reasons, and it didn't. I couldn't really see what was so new or novel.
Oh, and I guess
here.
John Castle wasn't teaching this.
He wasn't teaching it.
This was
that's right.
1970, fall 76.
It would have been fall of 75.
Fall
That was at
75.
MCH, right.
Oh, right, okay. So John Castle wasn't teaching it. He was on leave that year, I think.
Is that what happened?
I
Because
think he was on
I
leave.
did not get the John Castle bug, which everybody, of course, raved about at the time.
Yes,
So
well, you just missed him, I think.
yeah, and he became my advisor then the following year, just before he died.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
Who
so
did teach it then?
I don't remember. I think Nancy Dreyer was my teaching assistant.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think I
that's
gave her a hard
famous.
time as a cocky young student.
Uh-huh.
So
I'll have to see who was teaching it. Wouldn't have been Abdul Omran.
might have been.
Hmm.
I mean, I certainly knew him in that time, but this is a long time ago.
I
Vic.
appreciate that. I have a list on my on a website. I should go and check it.
Yeah, you should.
Edit it in if I learn how.
Should we mention that you and I were students at the same time?
I think so.
Yeah,
There's
we
a
should.
particular anecdote
That's
I
right.
want to hear about
Yeah,
that. But, so you were MCH in 75 and you took Epi 160 from somebody.
Somebody.
Debbie Wynn was,
Nancy Dreyer.
Nancy Dreyer.
Right.
And Debbie Wynn was in your class too?
Debbie Wynn, I think, had started a year ahead of me.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, there was a pretty stellar collection of students right around then, which which influenced me.
So in 76 you entered the Epi department.
Right. So Naomi suggested that I should go talk to the chair of epidemiology and maybe hang out there for a while. And I thought, well, so I went to see John Castle, and he said, boy, talk about a different day. He said, we've got some money, we can pay you, kind of a resident salary, and you just hang out and go to seminars, take courses if you want to, see what piques your interest. What a luxury. And I dove into that since it was such a great opportunity to, tailor things to my own interests. And within a month, I felt like this is where I should be. This is my calling. And I developed a project that that I got deeply engaged in, and that ended up being a PhD. I didn't plan to do that, but and I finished it in 2 years and 8 months or whatever it was, and ended up graduating really green and unexperienced in a lot of ways, but having a lot of confidence that...
You had enough degrees.
Yeah, I certainly had enough degrees.
So who were the people in Epi who fired your enthusiasm?
So, I'm not sure I can point to one person, but the environment was intellectually fertile. Mm-hmm. So in the students in our, I think you started a year after me, you said, but the student cadre who was in the student room at that time, Hal Morgenstern,
yes.
Harvey Checkaway,
Mm-hmm.
Nancy Dreyer, and a assortment of people who were master's students and PhD students who were really interesting people. And then, there were the clinical scholars who came over and took a bunch of epidemiology courses, and I got to know Tom Boyce, who's now in the Institute of Medicine, and Max Michael, who's the dean of the School of Public Health in Alabama, and then there were those postdocs around that time, attracted by John Castle, Alan Smith, and Neil Pierce, and Tony McMichael, and Bob Eaglehole. I mean, these really smart, visionary people who created a kind of a atmosphere of discussion and sparring that was great. Mm-hmm. And then the faculty were terrific, much smaller than they are today, but Al Tyroller and Michelle Ibrahim and John Castle, sort of paved the way for me to come in. I said, "Will you be my advisor?" He said, "Sure." I knew he had been ill, but he seemed to be doing well right then. But then he died in October of the year of the fall that I started. So Michelle Ibrahim became my my advisor at that point and kind of saw me through the rest. Sherman James, young faculty member, Carol Hogue, David Kleinbaum. I mean, these people who ended up...
Hulka and Ed Wagner, I guess.
And Ed Wagner, that's right. Ed was a important advisor to me. Barbara, I ended up trying to do I tried to do a project with some of her data, and I couldn't piece together what I wanted to do. But, you know, it was such a smart bunch of people, and, you know, half of them ended up writing textbooks. I mean, they were people who really affected the field, so it was a great time and place for me.
And so, on your thesis, what was the topic for your
It was about birth weight and perinatal mortality.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been working on the topic for 40 years.
At the time?
No,
Since
yeah,
yes.
it's been a pursuit that I've, you know, there's this thing called the low birth weight paradox, and it prompted me to get engaged with the question, and I've spent a lot of years trying to get to the bottom of it. And, you know, the last decade or so, I think we're getting close.
Would you share with people what the paradox is?
So the paradox is that when you look at birth weight is very strongly associated with perinatal survival. The smallest babies have the highest mortality. And babies who are in some high-risk group, like the babies of mothers who smoke, have smaller babies. And so the public health thinking at the time was that the babies have higher risk because they're smaller, because they're shoved to the weights in which the mortality is higher. But that doesn't fit all the data, because the small babies of mothers who smoke actually have better survival than the small babies of mothers who don't smoke. And that bothered and confused people for a long time. And you'll love this, Vic. I think what it comes down to is collider stratification bias. Unmeasured confounding by some variable that affects both birth weight and perinatal mortality. And it's probably intrauterine pathology. But that's way more, you know, there's a whole fascinating story there that would take a while to unwind. But I got started on a question that, and Carol Hogue had actually suggested to me that I look at this, because it was this conundrum.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a thinking, something that has preoccupied me for many years, and has been really fun to try and unpack.
And some of this is in the interview that you did for epidemiology.
Yeah,
so that will
that's
be a
right.
place people can go.
Mm.
But I want to spend some more time on your student experience, because I'm, as you know, interested
Mhm.
particularly in the epi department history. So, were you a teaching assistant?
No, no, I was actually for the 160. It wasn't 160. What was the course that was the introductory course for them? All the rest of the master's students in the school public.
So 160 was the general introduction course. There was a 162 for a while for ENVR students, environmental sciences students.
Okay.
There was a 161 that was the one that Abel Omran taught for population majors.
Mm-hmm.
There was actually, in those years, I don't know that there were any others. Well, there was a major section of
Yeah.
every 160.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. So I was teaching one of the non-major sections.
Well, yes,
of
most
the
of them were not
introductory.
major sections,
Yeah,
actually.
right, exactly.
So who were you, was there a faculty member you were working with?
You know, I think there was, but I can't remember who it was.
Okay, because in those days, at least when I took it in '72, each of the labs was run by a faculty member
Mm-hmm.
with a student assistant. And I thought that was still the case in '76. In '77, I can't remember because, well, in '77, I can't remember because I was in the section then for the epi majors, and that was led by faculty. That was led by Michelle Ibrahim.
Right, right.
But I think the non-major sections were led by faculty then, but I'm not sure.
Boy, I'm
Maybe
embarrassed that
not.
I can't remember.
Well, and it may be that there wasn't one, and that may be, that's an interesting question. I'll have to try to